So the greatest sporting event in the world, the Western States 100, is happening in about 10 days now. I've gone to the race to spectate for the last 3 years, and last year I was lucky enough to run the race, having gotten in off the lottery with a lucky one ticket. And I just wanted to share my top couple tips for incoming Western States runners as to how to run the race really well. That generally comes down to two things, which is pacing and heat management. So the best source of information I can suggest to runners running Western States is an article written in iRunFar by Joe Yuhan titled "The Western States Killing Machine." That talks about why Western States is so deceptively difficult. Basically helps runners figure out how they should pace the race. So when it comes to pacing, there's a number of reasons why Western States destroys a lot of people. It starts off with a 4-mile climb up to Emigrant Pass, which is about 8,500 feet of elevation. There's a lot of excitement at the beginning of the race, and if you're not careful, you can go out way too hard on that climb, whether that's to stay with your peers, or just because you feel like you're not as far up as you should. Secondly, Western States is not really known as a super mountainous race, but the first 30 miles of the course are quite alpine. You're at an average elevation of about 7,000 feet, and if you're someone who's not prepared for that, you might find that your heart rate is a little bit higher than it would be otherwise. And if you don't take it easy on those first 30 miles, then you could be quite trashed by the time you get to Robinson Flat, and especially trashed by the time you get to Deadwood Canyon, which is the start of Devil's Thumb. Secondly is the downhill. Western States is a net downhill race, and a lot of that happens between Robinson Flat, which is mile 31, and Deadwood Canyon, which is about mile 44, the bottom of Devil's Thumb. That's a half marathon with about 4,000 feet of descent between Robinson Flat and Deadwood Canyon. If you're not careful there, you may find yourself completely destroyed when you're going up Devil's Thumb, and that's no good. The important thing that you need to know about Western States is that the last 45 miles or so are very runnable. If you can get to those 45 miles feeling good and running, you're going to pass a lot of people, including some of the elite runners who have not paced it as well. That means going much slower than you think you should in the first 60 miles or so. So whatever you think is appropriate for those first 30 miles especially, and the next section, slow it down a bit and you will not regret it. The second aspect of doing really well at Western States has to do with heat management. So dealing with hot, dry heat like you'll see at Western States is very different from dealing with humid heat, which is what you see on the East Coast or in other parts of the world often. One of the things that keeps you cool the best is evaporative cooling. That's why you sweat. So when water evaporates off your body, it cools you down a little bit. And if you're from a very humid climate, the best way to get water to evaporate off yourself is to wear as little clothes as possible. So running shirtless will allow airflow, which will cause some of that water to evaporate off you. That doesn't work quite as well in a dry climate. The reason is water evaporates off you so quickly that it's almost hard to produce enough sweat. It's almost evaporating off of your body quicker than your body can produce it. So my recommendation for a hot, dry climate, like you'll see at Western States, is to wear a little bit more clothes than you might expect. The goal is to stay as wet as possible, and often that does mean wearing a shirt rather than no shirt and wearing arm sleeves or whatever you've got to do. Past Western States champion Pam Smith actually recommended wearing cotton because cotton is like wearing a sponge. Every time you go through a creek, you can soak that up, and that will help you tremendously. And another aspect of heat management is ice. So when I ran Western States, they told us that they had about 65 pounds of ice for every runner, which means at every aid station you have an opportunity to put ice wherever you can on your body. So for me, that was in arm sleeves, which I highly recommend, wearing arm sleeves that you can stuff with ice, and a bandana that I had around my neck. So my mom actually sewed in a pouch, which was made of a chamois, and we put ice in there every time I saw them and put that around my neck. That helped tremendously. I know a lot of women will put ice in their sports bras, and some people will put ice in their hats as well. And another piece of advice on that note is every now and then you'll cross a river or a creek. Use that to your advantage, especially at Deadwood Canyon, the bottom of Devil's Thumb. When you get to the bottom of Devil's Thumb, Deadwood Canyon, you'll cross a bridge over to the other side. Before you do that, there's a little bit of a side trail that will take you down to the river. I recommend taking that side trail, laying in the river for a few seconds, and then going back up to the bridge. It will cost you maybe 90 seconds, but it's totally worth it, and if you do that, you might end up passing quite a few people on the way up to Devil's Thumb, and it could save your race. So take those 90 seconds and get as wet as possible before you enter the rest of the canyons. The last piece of advice really applies to any 100-miler. I recommend having a crew at Western States. I'm pretty sure I would have dropped out of the race had I not had a crew. I knew that my pacers were really looking forward to running the second half of the course, and I didn't want to let them down, and I knew that all my family had supported me and stuff, and it was just way easier to keep going knowing that I had family waiting for me at the next aid stations or whatever. And anybody that you have that can be supportive in that sort of an endeavor would probably be quite helpful. And obviously the last thing is to have fun. Western States is my favorite place to be on the 4th Saturday in June. I've often said that the 4th Saturday is my favorite holiday. I would much rather be at Western States than at home on Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever. That's just the way it is. I love the race so much. It's my obsession. And I hope that no matter how fast you finish, that you have a good time out there and make some amazing memories. That's all I got. Good luck, everyone. Thanks.